Three, two, one. Welcome to All American Gunslingers, featuring you Baldy Reports.
Hey everybody, this is John with Ubaldi Reports, the one podcast that provides fact, not fiction, on issues facing America, whether internationally and domestically. And there's a lot to talk about between immigration, which just was a big story that came out today, and we were also going to talk about the crisis in American cities and states. But before we get started, let me introduce my two co-hosts.
Hold on, John. I think someone should introduce you because you are a Marine Master Gunnery Sergeant.
Yeah.
You had a combat tour in Iraq and Afghanistan, correct?
Yeah, 2 in Afghanistan, 1 to Iraq.
And I don't think a lot of people know about this because you don't really kind of wear this on your chest, but you're a journalist.
Yeah, I've got a master's degree. I've got published in a couple military journals.
Would you consider yourself a constitutional scholar or just a constitutionalist?
I would say a constitutional scholar. I'm not going to be an expert. I do read a lot about the constitutional issues.
You know Jonathan Turley, but
yeah, I know Jonathan Turley, but I also watch
Victor David Hansen.
Alan Dershowitz, another constitutional scholar from Harvard University Emeritus. But I also do read Antonia Scalia, Scalia's Court, and I do try to look at some of the things that are happened to our Constitution. I read the Constitution from our founders. I just read a book about how the U.S. Constitution got formed. So I try to keep myself as well informed as I can, working a full-time job.
Well, I mean, you also have a good dynamic when it comes to this show, is that you want to tell them the truth, but a lot more I think you want is to kind of more or less interject your opinion on the current situation.
I just want to let people know this is what's going on. And a lot of times I get fired up when I'm not on the show, when I talk to Joe and Ray.
Yeah.
And I just get appalled how the media doesn't cover some of these stories that we bring up on every day. Like, before we get into the cities and states, there was an issue came in today where a whistleblower for Health and Human Services, she spoke in front of Congress, and she said that through her, what she saw and what she observed, the government can't account for 80,000 migrant children.
That's crazy.
So now I looked it up in 2020 during the Trump administration. The New York Times reported there was like 1,500 they couldn't account for, which is appalling as it is. But we're talking 80,000. So basically what she was saying...
So, hold on. So during the Trump administration, we're talking about 1,500.
1,500.
And this administration, we're talking 81,000.
80,000 children. So basically the cartels bring them up to the border. They get processed. And what the government does through the Organization for Refugee and Resettlement, they try to resettle these children into families that either their relatives, their parents, or friends. But when they turned them over, and this was done under Health and Human Services, which is run by Javier Becerra, and Susan Rice, who was the domestic policy advisor, and she's stepping down in her last time in that position will be next month. They all knew about this.
So Toss with Sauce says fake news.
Where do you get your news from?
Where do you get your news from, John? I mean, you only get it from like what, 1 or 2 sources?
Oh, right? Yeah, I just get it from one source. I would just disagree. This isn't fake news. This is because the other media outlets don't report it. Mm-hmm. This is coming from congressional testimony. So if they're up on that one whistleblower for the who was under Health and Human Services through the Inspector General, if she's saying this in front of Congress, and if it's fake news, that means she's lying to Congress, which she can be charged for. So I would disagree with the comment as fake news. It's fact. So I don't know what to tell you, but I mean, if it's fake news, that means the 5 to 6 million that have crossed the southern border right now is fake news. Mm-hmm. Now I also not just get it from these whistleblowers. Like you all know, I work at a law enforcement supply company, and we deal with outfitting their vehicles. So I deal with a lot of federal, state, and local law enforcement officials, and we get a lot of Homeland Security officers come in. We get a lot of ICE officers, Border Patrol, and they tell me the same thing. It's far worse than is even being reported in the news. So right now, in 2 weeks, Title 43 goes away. And that means there's 40,000 just waiting to cross the
But
U.S. southern border.
what's that Title 43? What's that going to do with the people coming in?
What Title 43 was a policy put in place by the Trump administration because of health concern because of COVID. Well, now the COVID is over. These people are now going to be entering the United States, and the Biden administration hasn't put together a plan of what they're going to do when this influx of migrants are coming in. Now, remember, they criticized, and Democrats criticized the Trump administration, but in 2020 there was 450,000 illegal migrants captured at the U.S. southern border for that entire year.
So
now we're getting 2 million plus a year, and we're on pace to hit 3 million this year.
So Aaron M.B. Taylor says all that is anecdotal data, not reliable. And then we can go into I want OB fire. Okay, whatever. Biden's admin has apprehended far more than Trump. So,
of course you have when you have more people streaming across the U.S. southern border, and I wouldn't even say it's anecdotal. These are, I mean, if law enforcement are lying, they can be held accountable. So so anybody who says it's anecdotal, I mean, come on, the numbers speak for themselves. Then that's the Customs and Border Patrol reports these numbers. So if somebody's lying, they can be held accountable. So I don't say it's anecdotal. I think it's just fact.
Mm-hmm.
We can dismiss it away. Eric Adams complained that his city is being overwhelmed by migrants coming in, and they're going to have to deal with it. That's why they're costing them about $4 billion, I think, for a year. That's at least for fiscal 2022. So, I mean, if this is anecdotal, this isn't being fact, and this isn't happening in New York and some of the cities.
So maybe we should tell Erin to get her data correct.
I mean, I would like to know where she got her information, and then we can go back and forth. But, I mean, this isn't anecdotal data. This is being reported, but it's just not being reported by the media.
Yeah.
Just because the media doesn't cover it.
So where's all that data being maybe put so other people can see it? Because...
Well, you can just go to Customs and Border Patrol. You can go to Homeland Security. You can find it. But, I mean, just because the media doesn't cover it, I mean, I know it's not in the media now. I go to every week when I get my groceries, I stop by the baby formula aisle. It's still empty. Or you got minimal product on the shelf. Just because the media doesn't cover it and is not asking Congress about it, it doesn't go away. It doesn't mean it just doesn't go away. A lot of young families, young mothers are feeling it. And I talked to a friend who had, she had postpartum depression when she had her first child. So she told me, when you're on baby formula for your child, you just don't take one can and you're good. You could go through 4 or 5 cans till you find the right formula for your dietary needs of your child. Mm-hmm. So just because the Biden administration doesn't want to address it and the media doesn't want to cover it, I mean, look how many stories the media hasn't covered or did cover, which was flat wrong. Remember the case last year when the migrants, were the Border Patrol allegedly whipped Haitian migrants, mm-hmm. and come to find out even the photographer who was there who took the picture, said that didn't happen, but the Biden administration ran with it, and then there was they did a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act, and they found out the Homeland Security knew about it and let Alejandro Mayorkas know when they briefed President Biden that this didn't happen, mm-hmm. but they still ran with it anyway. And they had to backtrack, but they never said they were wrong.
Is complicit the same as guilty? Because we know that there's these children coming over.
Correct.
And that they're more than likely going into the, sex trafficking or work, I guess not slave labor, but what would we call it? Child labor.
Child labor.
Kind of stuff. So in America's complicit because we know what's going on.
We are complicit.
We're not keeping accountability of the people that are coming through.
But we're not. See, the problem is we're not fixing the problem. Now remember, Vice President Kamala Harris was tasked to be the border czar. She hasn't been in the border in over a year and a half, almost 2 years, except for June of 2020 when she was shamed to go to the border. So what is the policy? Yeah, okay. Alejandro Mayorkas, when he was on Capitol Hill a couple weeks ago, he blamed the previous administration for the dysfunctional attitude at the border. Okay, if we go with that, if President Trump in 2020 had 450,000 illegal migrants apprehended or crossing the U.S. southern border, the very next year under Joe Biden, it was up to almost 2 million. 2022 was 2.3 million. And they just, back in February, they crossed over 1 million. Mm-hmm. Look at all the fentanyl that's pouring in. It's coming from China to the cartels and into the country. And I talked to, again, state, local, and federal law enforcement, and they all say the same thing, that the biggest drug of choice that's coming in is fentanyl is pouring across that U.S. southern border. So we can wish it away. That doesn't mean the problem goes away. And that's, you look at these cities and states, they're a disaster. I mean, it's just, there's a crisis in America, and maybe if we had a media that, and I don't expect the media to be cheerleaders for the Republicans. Mm-hmm. I want them to call out Republicans when they do something wrong. But I also want them to be fair and honest and be impartial like the ethics in journalism is. And if you go by that, the standard is stand by the accuracy of your work. How many stories or events the media got wrong? And then it's just, or they use sources when it's one source or that source was made up. So it's just, I mean, look at, like, take Chicago. Chicago did not reelect its previous mayor or the current mayor until May 10th, which was Lori Lightfoot. Then they just elected because of the crime issue. Who did they elect? Brandon Johnson, a very progressive, and they're going to see crime. He barely speaks out when teenagers were rioting in the street a couple weeks ago, said nothing. And then you've got, look at the educational thing. This is something, even Bill Maher said this. 1 in 3 children in America can't read to grade level, and it's about 80% of black Americans cannot read to grade level.
I like that guy's point.
Yeah, we want to bring up something real quick. Before
Okay,
we
go ahead.
There's always a choice.
818 guy said, if guns don't kill, neither do drugs. The drug user is the problem. Fix that first.
Yeah.
I think I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, using is a choice.
Well, it is. That's, I mean,
you chose to do it in the first place. I'm not.
But
saying
look what we do when it comes to drugs. You look at Hollywood; they always have this virtue signaling. They make it a cottage industry. I made it a couple of years ago, and I'm glad he recovered. I guess you're always a recovering addict. It was Robert Downey Jr. Mm-hmm. Everybody said, "Oh, he's such a hero because he got the treatment." And there was some of the people who deal with drug addiction. The advocates and make sure people get drugs, said, don't lionize the guy because we're glad he's getting the help he needs, but he has the means and resources. Think about somebody who's poor. I knew a family in my church. The daughter got involved in drugs and she became addicted. Mm-hmm. So the parents had to take a second mortgage on their home to help her daughter overcome her addiction. She recovered. She's got a nice family now. True. But that family, the parents, have to pay a second mortgage on their home. Robert Downey Jr. is worth millions. So he can go to the best drug treatment program. What happens if somebody you or me got addicted to it? Are we going to have the money to go to the best treatment center in America? No, so it's just like violence and guns.
Hold on, I can't. No. I can't necessarily agree with that because we're all attached to the VA some way or some form. So if there was an addiction of some sort, we could use the means of maybe going through the VA.
But is the VA the same treatment center that Robert Downey Jr. is going to get?
Of course not. But I mean,
but even just like with guns. I know, Ray, you're a big gun advocate and believe in the Second Amendment. Hollywood always speaks out of the proliferation of guns. But look at the movies that come out. How many of you seen the John Wick sagas?
We don't
They're
even need to.
They're extremely violent with guns just blazing all over the place. So if you're so against guns, why do you prolific that type of violence on the movie screen?
I can combat that, but you go first.
We don't even need to look that far. We can stay in the Hollywood scene, but Alec Baldwin just proved everybody's point about gun safety and what happens when you neglect every bit of firearm safety.
Exactly.
There's people not breathing because of his actions. The gun didn't pull the trigger. He did.
Somebody.
So,
Well, but even just like with President Biden's son, Hunter.
Right.
He's a big gun control advocate, but his son committed a felony because he lied on a federal firearm application, and even his
discarded a firearm.
That was one of his sons. The widow of his, I think, Beau Biden, just threw a firearm away. Mm-hmm. So that's also a crime. So if you want to look at gun control, look no further than your own family before you start telling Americans that you can't own a firearm.
Plus, we also left everything in Afghanistan.
Oh yeah, we left $80 billion worth of weapons.
So don't complain.
But
about
here's the other part.
AR.
But here's the other part of that. The special Inspector General of Afghan Reconstruction was on Capitol Hill last month. Now this didn't make a big play, and I read their document. This didn't get much play by the media. Why? Because they're probably protecting Joe Biden. But that Inspector General said, in his estimation, he still believes that the U.S. is still funding the Taliban to help pay for humanitarian issues. Mm-hmm. That same Inspector General said when President Biden said we didn't leave any Americans behind, we got our allies back. That's false. And look what's going on in the Sudan. We get some personnel out, but we left what? I think the number, I mean, don't quote me on this, but they think it's like 10,000 Americans are still stuck.
Now, we wouldn't have another Benghazi situation on our hands,
well,
would we?
this would be worse than that. This would be a major humanitarian crisis by leaving Americans behind and not planning for
I wanted
this.
to go back to the guns just for a little bit, and with like Hollywood, is that there is like an extreme non-realistic approach to it because, you know, you're not having a 15-minute, 20-minute firefight in the middle of downtown Los Angeles during a bank heist with 45 police officers, and it's not happening as regular as you would think watching it on as you would.
Well, they did have it a couple of years ago. I think it was in the late 90s. Mm-hmm. They had a bunch of.
It could happen.
No. They did.
Was that the Hollywood?
There was a Hollywood. I think it was a bank robbery. Guys had a bunch of AKs, and the police had to go into a gun store to get.
Oh, really?
Semi-automatic weapons. Now, but with the problem,
that's what I like to see.
Okay, the problem with that is,
now you're talking. I want to see that movie.
But when they did look at how these individuals got guns, they committed gun violations before, which was a felony, and it was batted down to a misdemeanor.
But it's not as consistent.
No, it's
as you would see in Hollywood. You don't see cops chasing an ambulance with a bunch of retired or former military guys trying to make money to so it's really far-fetched about the whole the way the guns are used and what's going on, because if that was happening, the whole world would be in chaos, because every 5 to 10 minutes there's some super battle going on with
the only thing we got now
automatic weapons,
what you're talking about, not a big battle, but we're seeing the crime in American cities, like you see Chicago, Philadelphia, New York. Take San Francisco. There was I believe a deputy fire marshal or fire commissioner was hit over the head with a pipe, and it looks like they're not going to charge the individual who did it.
Well, just in Chicago, a kid's killed a baby.
14.
And now they got misdemeanor.
They got misdemeanor trespassing unless it gets batted up. But even Bill Maher, he said this. Look at these cities. Take Chicago. I mean, I know we always go to Chicago.
Well, because it's the most.
Okay, but take Chicago.
Yeah.
And he said, it's not whites killing whites. It's black children killing black kids. Mm-hmm. But what he said is, at the same time, 1 in 3 American children can't read or do math to grade level. Also, about 80% of African American kids can't do math or read to grade level. So my question is this. Where's President Obama? when he left the White House, he didn't go back to Chicago. He went to Martha's Vineyard. Now, that's his prerogative, but he hasn't spoken out. Where's Oprah Winfrey? Where's Colin Kaepernick? Colin Kaepernick makes millions as virtue signaling, talk about he's a social justice warrior. Where's he at? Do they like it because they make money off the misery of their own people?
Well, I mean,
I
another.
think you're onto something.
Hold on.
I mean,
but I think I got a question going on here.
Go ahead.
Is there a correlation between education and, say, violence or crime in those cities?
Well, there's two parts to that. Yes, there is a correlation because if you're not being educated and you graduate, if the statistics are, and this is not me saying this is going by, you get this information from Chicago Unified School District. I looked at the Illinois Policy Center, and you can go to the national report card. But if you graduate high school and you're only reading or doing math at a middle school level, what kind of job are you going to get? You're not. So that means you can only get a certain amount of jobs. So that means you're tied to the government on welfare, food stamps, or whatever. So you have a subsistence living. So if you're trying to live in some of these areas, you're kind of forced into crime. And then the other part of this equation, and this is not a racial issue, if you look at the statistics from the U.S. Census Bureaus and others, in 1960, deep in the heart of Jim Crow era America, 70% or more African-American children lived in a two-parent family. At the start of the civil rights movement, all through the 60s and into the early 70s, and now you jump to 2023, right now 70% or more African-American children come from are raised by a single-parent family. So is America less racist now, or is America more racist now? Those are the questions, but no one does anything. And that's why I admonished all these athletes. And this is not me saying. A lot of civil rights leaders or activists said, why haven't they spoken up? I mean, President Obama has dead silent on this issue. His children aren't affected. Like when they talk about public schools, why they can't read or do math to that level. President Obama didn't send his kids to public school. They went to private from even before he became president. Why hasn't Oprah looked at this? Colin Kaepernick. All these, or Al Sharpton, he'll jump at every time a white person does anything to an African American, but he's eerily silent on the condition of his own community.
Well, it's selling. It's a selling point.
Well,
racism is selling.
Well, look at
making money.
But here's another point. Look at the city of Baltimore. Remember a couple of years ago, President Trump called that a crap city. Okay.
It wasn't really.
There's a couple districts in the city of Baltimore. Not one kid can pass the test at grade level. Not one. And you're talking over 50 schools. But if you look at it, last year, the superintendent of public education for those school districts, she got a pay raise. She makes about $445,000 a year. Randy Weingard, she's the president of the second largest national teachers union, who did everything she possibly could to keep schools closed. She makes $500,000 a year. So how is this educating America? If we're not educating our kids, how are we competing with China? How are we competing with Europe? And even the top math scores come out of Asian nations, not America.
Can I pump in here real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So for Mr. Don't look at me, it's not racist if it's true. And by saying that is like the stats prove what you're saying is accurate. He's trying to come off and saying that they're going to close us down because we're talking race when it comes to Baltimore or Chicago.
But at the point you talk about closing, we've been shut down on certain points.
Oh, we have been.
We have been. And other constitutional scholars have said the same thing. As soon as you bring up something that you don't go by the standard voice, you get shut down. There's universities that are trying to stifle free speech. You may not like what I'm saying, You may disagree. That's fine. All I want is people to discuss things. I may learn from you. You may learn from me. But at the same time, stifling me or shutting me down, that's telling me I'm saying something right here. If I'm wrong, question me on it. But look at these kids. You're telling me these kids are not getting an education? So where are they going to end up? I've talked to law enforcement officials. If they're not educated and they don't have too strong family connection, where do they end up? They end up in the law enforcement community's venue. They end up in jail or prison. And that's fact. You look at everybody in prison, they either come from a very dysfunctional family or they come from, they're not educated. And if you want to say that every black person or every brown person in jail is because of they just picked them off the street, that's a false narrative.
That would be racist.
But look at these cities' governments and states. California touted we got $1 billion surplus. They're talking about a $30 billion debt now. California, my state that I came from, 1 in 3 homeless people in America is in California. California has the highest poverty level of any state, highest income inequality. A person of color does far worse in California than any other state, including Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and some of those southern states. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, was traveling all over the South. He went to Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Texas, all these red states to tout how bad these red states are compared to his utopian version of California. I wish the media would have done just a little fact checking. I mean, I'm not saying I'm digging deep into this, but if you do a little bit of fact checking, you can figure out how dysfunctional that state is, and only getting worse. They can't even meet its energy needs. And this summer, we're going to go right back to brownouts and blackouts in California.
Oh, well, yeah, it's California.
But it's just sad these kids are not getting the opportunities they have. But take President Biden. He uses race as a rallying cry. His press secretary does the same thing. Everything's about race or
hilarious.
gender or anything else. But when you question them on it, their policies are actually doing more harm to the minority community and to that extent to most of America.
You mean the guy who started his political career 50 some odd years ago now, who ran on pro-segregations talking about race and is the president, and 81 million people voted for him? Yes.
Well, but here's another point. Even besides that, Joe Biden is running for re-election. Okay.
At 88 years old.
Okay. At 80 years old, he's running for re-election.
That's a big one.
Okay, but here's the point. He's the first president in U.S. history, upon assuming the White House, had 15 consecutive years or more in one office. He's been in the Senate since I was in 3rd grade until he got elected to the vice presidency in 2008.
I wasn't even born yet.
Okay. But what I'm saying is he was part of everything. He talks about we're going to bring jobs back from China. He's the one that instituted all these that sent jobs over. He's never had a job. He's outside of government. So when you're a senator, you become an expert on certain topics. He was the chairman or ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Tell me what region of the world is better off because of Joe Biden. Or look like we're going to continue war with Ukraine. And I just heard him today. He talked about the Ukraine war is causing gas prices to spike and inflation to go up. So if you're blaming the war in Ukraine, it's been well over a year. What are you doing to stop it, to end it? We're almost in a war, we could potentially be in a war with China. We've got our embassy. We pulled out of Afghanistan. We're having our embassy pulled out of Sudan, but we left Americans behind. We got an immigration problem that's sending 2 million plus immigrants streaming across the southern border. That's not counted those who didn't get caught.
So, let's see, what's his name? James Let's see. James Duggan said those red states receive the most federal funding and contribute the least.
That's I would say that's a false narrative. I can go by my state of Florida.
Okay.
Florida, I mean, they always throw that in, but if you factor in all the military bases and all the other stuff, it's not accurate. Those states, I mean, it's just not enough. Even the federal, like the Census Bureau of Labor Statistic, or the Bureau of Economic Analysis have all said the same thing. That's not accurate. Mm-hmm. That these states take more from the federal government than they give back.
Yeah.
If you took it by per capita, it's just not an accurate statement.
Okay. So, John, how can they go ahead and get a hold of us if they need to?
You can find us by going to ubaldireports@gmail.com. Check us out on all our social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, obviously TikTok. You can check us out on all our streaming sites that we place the podcast on. Keep following Ubaldi Reports because we want to do this 5 days a week, because there's always certain stuff that's going on, and especially as we start gearing up for the election. So your support will help us do that. But before we let go, I want to turn the time over to Joe and Ray to talk about American Gunslingers, to tell you what they do for their programs.
So Ray and I, we do All American Gunslingers. We talk whiskey, guns, and what we've come to the conclusion of other things.
To say the least.
And they get a little more edgier than this show.
Yeah.
I guess if you get a couple Marines talking about something, it's going to lead to something else. So we can't talk about that here. So you can definitely hear us on All American Gunslingers. We're working on a website, getting that thing up. We're also working on other things like getting our own shop, our own gun store, our own gunsmithing and range stuff. So you can hear us talking about that as well. Ray, how can they go ahead and get a hold of you?
You can get a hold of me. My email is raymond.aags@gmail.com. We can talk anything gun control related, Second Amendment, the new reports that come out showing more favoritism than, any gun control. And then we could also talk about what happened today and on the special panel between the panel and the ATF getting roasted, finally.
Really?
Okay.
All right. And then you can get us, you can email us at allamericangunslingers@gmail.com, and you can look out for the future of allamericangunslingers.com. So have a great day, everybody.
So keep following Ubaldi Reports until next Wednesday at 7:30 Eastern.